Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Eva Dace and I am a member of the marketing department here at Vitech Corporation. I will be your host during today's webinar as Bethany Maddox presents Methods of Parsing and Outputting Data. Our program today is sponsored by Vitech Corporation, a 21-year-old company that offers model-based software and services. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few technical details. First, questions. We're going to do questions a little differently today. Please send your questions in as soon as you think of them, as Bethany will pause at the end of each section of the presentation to take a few minutes to answer questions on that particular topic. As usual, submit your questions using the question and chat functions in the GoToWebinar window. Second, recording. The webinar is being recorded today. If you are having technical difficulties during the presentation, an online archive with this presentation will be available within 24 hours of the live version. Now let me introduce our presenter. Bethany Maddox serves Vitech's customers primarily at the support desk as the customer care specialist. Between support cases, she manages the overall vision of customer care at Vitech, developing instructional screencasts on various core and Genesis topics and elements of software documentation. Although this is her first webinar as presenter, Bethany has often served as host, writer, and technical manager of countless educational and marketing webinars throughout her tenure at Vitech. Now I'm turning the mic over to Bethany. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Eva. I just have to take a minute and say how glad I am to be here today. As you said, I've spent a lot of time on the host side of our webinars, and I'm really excited about moving over to the other side and sharing with all of our attendees today about methods of getting data into and out of core. I have a lot of information to share today, and we're going to start with an overview of the different methods of bringing data into core. During this discussion, we'll talk about when each is appropriate for what type of need. Then we'll get into core and go hands-on with each one. Once we've completed our discussion of bringing data into core, we're going to talk about methods of outputting it. Today's discussion will focus on what are typically informal methods or methods used for data transfer. We'll talk about exporting to CSV, exporting to Word, and exporting to DOORS. If the Export to Word feature doesn't sound familiar, that's because it's new. We just released it last week in Service Pack 2 for Core 9. As long as I'm talking about new content in Service Packs, I'll take a moment to mention that our core developers have released new capabilities in both Service Pack 1 and Service Pack 2 for Core 9. Some were planned capabilities, and others were in response to information we received from customers. We are always interested in what you have to say, so please let our support team know what you think about these methods of outputting data. If you love them, I'm sure the developers would enjoy a pat on the back. If you think we could do better, please do let us know. Getting back to today's agenda, let's get started talking about methods of bringing data into core. Choosing which method by which to parse the data most heavily depends on the format of your source. If your data is in a Word or other text document, you'll want to use the element extractor or the document parser. With two options for parsing text documents, we need to talk about when each is best. The element extractor will load the document and allow you to manually designate each attribute of an element. This is great when you have a small amount of text to transfer, as well as when you wish to reuse portions of the information. The document parser is best when you want to load the entire contents of the document. The document parser will allow you to parse the full document into elements of any class, although it is primarily used for requirements. The document parser adds a little more automation while still allowing you to review the results prior to committing the data to the repository. We'll go hands-on with both in just a few minutes. If you're working with data of any kind of table, it's most likely from Excel. After converting this to a CSV format, Core can import this data. If you are a longtime Core user, then you have probably used our advanced CSV parser. With Core 9, we built this into the tool with a wizard-style dialog simplifying the process and eliminating the usage of scripts. We've also included an ability to set up templates that you can customize the first time and reuse for subsequent parsing. Let's roll back to the element extractor and get started with our hands-on time in Core. There we go. Here you see Core opened to a blank project. I'll open the element extractor using the Tools menu. The area on the left is where we will load the document. Click the Load Document icon in the toolbar and select your document. You'll now see the document loaded on the left side. Using the element extractor is really quite simple. I start by selecting the class to which I want to parse the data. Since this is a requirements document, I will switch that to requirements. Oops. There we go. The next field for folder will default to the name of the class. If you have subfolders in the class to which you'd like to bring these elements, you can select that here. Now, let's look at the document text and see what we can bring over. Any text field can be populated by highlighting the text in the document on the left, then clicking the button immediately preceding the attribute. Let's create our top-level requirement element. First, I'll highlight the text Specific Requirements. Oops, sorry, my mouse isn't terribly responsive today. Now that I have it highlighted, I'll click the button preceding the name field, and it transfers. I could designate a number in the same way if I choose. For this demonstration, we'll skip the number. Now, let's bring over the entire text of the specific requirements and place that in the description field. This copy-paste method can be utilized to bring over any text. Attributes of other types need to be manually set. I will set the type to composite, the origin to originating. As you can see, any attribute can be completed here in the element extractor. You can also set relationships. Let's go ahead and establish that the specific requirements requirement element is documented by the source document element. This dialog works just like other relationship dialogs in Core, allowing me to create the target element on the fly. Now that I'm done defining the element definition, let's commit it to the repository. Now, if I switch back over to the Project Explorer, you'll see that I now have a requirement element and a document element. There's still a few more features that we won't have time to cover today for the element extractor. If you want more information about this method, you can find that in our Help tool. Click Help, then Help Contents. Double-click on the book for getting information into and out of Core, and you'll find information on the various methods. In this case, you would want to look for manual element extraction. Let's open a different project, and now we're going to use the we're going to use the document parser capability to bring in all of the requirements quickly with decomposition and traceability to the source document. Open the document parser with the button on the toolbar or from the Tools menu. Just like the element extractor, in the document parser, you will need to load the source document. Let's examine the options on the left-hand side near the bottom. First, actually on the side you see the document. Below that, we want to look here and see what each one of these means. The first two options are much like the element extractor in that you must select the class to which we are parsing, as well as a subfolder if desired. Again, my sample is a requirements document, so we'll select the requirements class. Next, I'll need to designate the document element to which my top-level requirement will be linked through a documented by relationship. We don't have one yet in the repository, so I'll need to create it. Here you see the familiar relationship dialog that allows me to create the element. The next option is for the prefix, and it allows me to designate a prefix to my element numbers. If your team uses a number prefix, you can enter it here. For this demonstration, I'll leave it blank. Finally, we need to talk about keywords. Here you see the most common keywords for requirements. Remember that the document parser can parse elements into any class, so you may wish to adjust these keywords. The keywords here are used to determine which phrases need to be parsed into elements of the desired class. With the current setting, any phrases with shall, will, or must will be parsed as requirements. When you are satisfied with how you've configured the parser, click the Parse button. Note that at this stage, the data has not yet been committed to your repository. We firmly believe that having a human in the parsing loop is of critical importance to the process. That's why we've inserted this sort of pausing moment that allows you to examine the data and refine it prior to committing it to your repository. Of particular note here is this left-hand column. A check mark indicates that this element will be marked as a requirement in your repository. This means that the phrase contains a keyword. If the phrase does not contain a keyword, such as these down here, it is still entered in the table and marked as debris. You may find useful information in the debris that can be transferred to other elements, which is why in some of our samples we do ask you to create all of the elements and then examine the debris in the Project Explorer. When you are satisfied with your table, click the Create Element icon to commit your data to the repository. Now I'll close the document parser and take a look at it in Core. You'll see that I have a document element that documents my top requirements, which are further refined into leaf level requirements. This is when I would normally begin my intense requirements analysis work. The document parser and element extractor are your best options when dealing with formal documents and data in text documents that you'd like to parse. If you have tables or data from other tools, then we'll need to take a good look at the CSV and DOORS imports. For this sample of the CSV import, I have created a CSV file that contains components. Let's take a quick look at that file. Here we go. It's rather basic with the class, element name, number, description, built from targets, and performs targets. I used the export to CSV capability in Core 9 to create this, and we'll detail how to do that later on. Let's close that down now and get started by clicking File, Import from CSV. Let's find my file that we're going to import and click Open. Now, I'm asked what class to which I'd like to import the data. Here, you can actually bring it into any area. If I wanted to just bring it into the project as a whole, I could click Database. I could select a package if my project has them, or I can choose any class. I'll go ahead and select Component. Next, I'm presented with a table. This is the table definition dialog. We're going to spend a good deal of time here because this dialog underpins all of the tabular interfaces that support import and export of data with CSV, DOORS, and Word. This common approach, coupled with a shared set of table definitions, is used by all of these mechanisms, enabling a define once and use many times mentality. We're going to switch back over to PowerPoint really quick to talk about it there. Now, let's take a look. These table definitions can be simple or complex and are included as part of the project definition, much like icon templates, sort blocks, and other utility objects. In the drop-down box in the top left corner, you'll find a set of stored definitions that we've created for you. You can also create your own stored definition and save it to this list. To do that, simply customize the information below in the table, then click the Save icon. Your custom table definition is part of your project's data and will be included with any project backups that you make. You can also export only table definitions in the event you would like to share them with other users on other projects. For exports, you can use the sort block and filter options in the top right corner to apply to the output data. The main body of the dialog consists of a series of banded entries, each entry representing a column specification. Core will seed this table with information from the header row of your CSV file with importing, which you see here in this column. For imports, the seeded information needs only a little adjustment. You may need to do more for exports, so let's take the time to break this down. Position here is the order left to right that the columns appear in your CSV file. This is an editable field, and should you choose to do so, the table will reorder itself based on this entry. The column type allows you to specify the kind of data contained. There are a lot of options here, so rather than talking through each one, let me point you to where you can find detail of this in Core. We'll find this in the Help section. And again, I'll open the book for getting information into and out of Core. All of the options here that use the table definition will have a link to the table definition dialog help page. So in this case, I'll go ahead and open Importing from CSV and scroll down till I find that link. There we go. Here's the information on the table definition dialog. It describes the entire dialog, but in particular, the table column types that we were just talking about. Note that there is separate information for the behavior you'll find during output in the middle column, and then during input in the right side column. As I learned to use the table definition dialog, I've referenced this page often. Now let's switch on back. The definition column specifies the attribute, parameter, or relation definition to use. As we examine the dialog on screen, we can see that the attributes and relationships have been read from my source file, and this field is often completed for me. You'll find that to be the case for imports. For exports, you may do a more adjustment here. In the event you are importing a relationship, you'll need to set the next field to define the class, that is the target of the relationship. Finally, the based on field is a key concept that we need to understand. This is the source object for the cell. Every cell type requires an object to act upon. By specifying the source object, the tables can allow you to import or export a rather complex data set. In the case of attributes and relationships, you will set the based on field to reference the position which contains the element name. So you'll see here my number references position 2, and when I look at position 2, we see that it is the element name. Now that we've gone over all of the table definition options, let's go back to Core and complete my import. I'm in the wrong project. Let's switch. There's the geospatial library, and I think we already had the import wizard open. There it is. Okay, so we'll start with position 1. This is the class name. Notice that based on says data. Then position 2 references position 1. This tells Core to set the element name in the class that was defined in position 1. In positions 3 and 4, we have attributes, and based on is set to position 2, again the element name. No adjustment is needed here. Positions 5 and 6 contain relationships. Let's set the target class. Components are built from other components, and components perform functions. We'll leave based on set to 2, meaning that we are attaching these relationships to the element specified in position 2. Now let's complete the import. Clicking Next, I see some options for my import. I generally leave these at the default settings because most of the work I do is a full import. If you are performing incremental imports, you should definitely take the time to review these, especially the Clear Existing Targets and Relationships option here. Again, a full definition of these options is available in the help files for the CSV Import Wizard. Now, I'll click Import, and my import completes. What started with no components now has 9 with decomposition, as well as relationships to the functions that they perform. This seems like a good time to pause for questions. Eva, do you have any questions relating to CSV import?
I do. I have one from Mark, and he wants to know, how does Core handle compound requirements?
So I'm assuming, Mark, you mean a requirement statement that has multiple requirements in it. If that's not accurate, then please respond back to Eva, let her know, and she'll interrupt me.
He said yes.
Yes, fantastic, Mark, thank you. What we normally do is bring that in as a requirement and then decompose it. So I would create requirement element 1, and then my description is going to be that compound statement. And then I'm going to decompose it. So requirement 1 is decomposed by 1.1. Actually, the relationship is refined by. A requirement is refined by another requirement. Then 1.1 is one of those statements within the compound. 1.2 is another one. 1.3 and so on. If you have your data structured that way in the CSV file, Core can import all of those relationships and create that traceability for you. Mark, if I missed the mark on that one. Sorry, not intended, but there it was. Mark, please let us know, and I can clarify, and I can take another stab at that one. Are there any others?
I think you cleared it up for him. He said thank you, so I think that was good.
Great.
That was the only question for this section, so I think we're ready to move on.
Sounds great. Now that we've learned about the table definition, let's apply it to the doors import. First, let me switch over to another project that I've prepared for this demo. This is our Vitek ventilator project, which is currently being developed by Warren Smith, one of our sales team members. So I want to make sure and give him a big thanks for helping me out and lending me this project. Now, let's get this import started. So File, Import from Doors. Let's select my data file. Now let's pause for a moment here and discuss a key concept with the doors import. Here, we are asked to select a package. You need to have one set up for this import. All elements that you want to transfer will import into this package. Conversely, when exporting to doors, you'll export the entire contents of this package. Let's go ahead and select it and click Next. Now, I need to determine what type of import I want to do. If it's requirements only, I select the first option. If my data includes components, functions, or other systems engineering information, then I want to select Derived Requirements and Design. My data file is requirements only. Next, I need to define the table mapping. Notice that Core selected a stored definition for me, in this case the doors requirement import template. When we set this up, we did design it to be compatible with the most common exports from doors. However, my data file wasn't in this order that the definition called for, so I'm going to switch to one of the custom definitions that I mentioned you could make. Again, to make one, all you need to do is adjust this table and then click the Save button and name your template. And that's what Warren so kindly did for me. So we're going to switch over to the template developed by Warren. Now, I'll scan over the list really quick and just make sure that everything is mapped correctly. And it looks good here. So we're going to go ahead and switch on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the table since we clearly defined it earlier, but if questions come up, please do let Eva know, and we'll talk about them as we go. Here we have our import options. The first 3 are exactly like the ones that you find in the CSV import. The 4th option is unique to the doors imports. If this option is selected, core parses the door object number attribute and establishes parent-child relationships based upon this number. Whereas core uses an explicit relationship to track this. Doors embeds this information in the object number. If no is selected for this option, core will not take the special steps to rebuild element hierarchies after the import completes. The data I'm working with was sourced from doors with that information, so we're going to leave it at yes. Let's accept all the default options and click import. And there we go. Now that my import is complete, we see my requirements are now in core with all of their attributes set according to what was in the file. Eva, let's pause one more time for questions. Do you have any questions related to the doors import or anything going back to the CSV import or table definition?
No, not this time. I think we're good to move on.
Okay, great. Just a reminder for everyone, send them in as you go and we'll take care of them. Let's switch over to talking about exporting now. While there are a variety of formal documents in core, today we're going to focus on methods that you would use to data transfer with other tools, as well as informal data output methods. These are going to be export to CSV, export to doors, and export to Word. Let's dive right in with export to CSV. First, I'm going to switch over to a project that has a little more data in it. In this case, it's going to be our Patriot missile sample. We'll start from the File menu again, and this time go to Export and then to CSV. The first step of the CSV export is to designate what I want to export. Again, here I can choose the whole project, a package, or a class. This particular project is mostly functions, so I'm going to demonstrate that today. I'll click Functions, then click Next. Let's leverage another one of the stored definitions and select Functions. My table is now seeded with common outputs for the function class. There are a few things on this table definition that are different from imports, so let's take a minute to detail those. First, notice the plus on the top right side. This allows me to add a row should I choose. Looking below that, you'll notice buttons with a big red X. Of course, I can use these to delete a row. This allows me just a little bit of on-the-fly customization. Second, there's also a few changes to these banded rows. Let's first look at the option below the definition field, output as single cell. This is used when you are outputting a type of data with multiple values, such as targets of a relationship. For each use case, it will vary as to whether you want all of the multiple values in a single cell or if you want each one to create a new row in the output file. And this is going to allow you to choose. Next, notice the column for sort block. In the import dialog, this was actually the target column. For element, relationships, and target types, which are set here, the sort block will be used to both sort and represent the data. Remember, a sort block can be used to change the way data is represented in any kind of list or output. The sort block dropdown provides access to all of the sort blocks defined for this project. Below that is an option for repeat values. When generating tables, it is quite common to generate multiple rows based upon a single value. For example, if column 1 is a requirement, column 2 is the requirement's children, and column 3 is the description for the child requirement, you will likely have many child rows. In this situation, if this option is enabled for column 1, the requirement name will be repeated for every row. If this option is unchecked, the requirement name will be output the first time only, and subsequent rows will contain a blank cell for this column. In general here, if you are outputting it to use for presentation or something like that, you might not use the repeat values, but if you're outputting it for transfer to another tool or planning to bring it back into core, you definitely want to use the repeat values option. Finally, let's talk about the show column option. In most cases, we do want all columns to show up in the table that we output. Although sometimes we need a column to serve as source data for another column, but we don't actually want it to display. Unchecking this option will hide the column in the output table, essentially leveraging the hide feature in Excel. Now that we've talked about the differences in the table definition for exports, let's take a look at what I'm exporting here. We see that I'm outputting the element number, the name, targets of the inputs relationship, targets of the outputs relationship, targets of the triggered by relationship, and targets of the allocated to relationship. I'll select next the import location and click Save after I make sure I tell it that I do want it to open the file. So let's select our location. I'm going to keep it in this nice little folder, and it pre-names it functions, which is nice, and then save. Let's take a look. Here we see my data file. There's not a lot of information in this particular project, which is why it does look a little sparse. Now, are you ready to see this work for the doors export? Let's go ahead and do it. First, let me switch back over to my project that had some doors requirements in it. Now, let's get the export started. File, Export to Doors. I'll select my doors requirements package. Remember, we talked before when importing that the doors import and export does require packages. When exporting from core to doors, there are two primary scenarios. If core is the authoritative data source, data can be structured based upon core's paragraph numbers, and I should select yes here. If doors is the authoritative data source, data should be structured based upon the doors object number, and I should select no. For this sample, I'll select yes and click next. Now is the table definition. Notice it selected a definition for me. If I had selected no on the previous dialog, core would have selected a different definition. It's always a good idea when you get to the table definition to check which one is in use when you first come to this page. Here we see I'm outputting the object ID, the object heading, the object number, object text, and much more. Again, I have options to add or delete the bands if desired. For now, I'm going to go ahead and accept the defaults and click Export. I'll define the file name and location, which both look good, and click Save. Now let's take a look at my output file. And there we are. Notice that the core ID is output. This is important when we plan to have a two-way data sync. While doors manages this with the object ID, core manages it with the core ID. By importing and exporting both all the time and tying them to that element, we make sure that each tool has the information it needs to keep our data consistent. Eva, this seems like a good time to pause for questions. Do you have anything related to CSV or doors export?
We don't have anything for this section, but I would just like to let our listeners know that we will provide one last opportunity for questions at the very end of the presentation. So if you think of questions along the way, feel free to submit them anytime.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go on. We have one more export method to go, and this one is brand new, the one I mentioned in my introduction. We just released Export to Word last week with Service Pack 2. So let's take a look at how it works. We think you're going to like this so much that we put it right on the toolbar with its own icon. Now, the CSV Export Wizard should look a little bit familiar by now, and this is very similar. This project has mostly requirements, so let's go ahead and output that. Click Next. And again, the very familiar table definition. This uses the exact same methods and stored definitions as the CSV and DOORS exports. Since we have mostly requirements here, I'm going to select the requirements stored definition and then click Next. Here we have a variety of options that you can use to customize your output. I'll accept the defaults and it will open the file when we're complete. Wow, that was fast. Now we have an output very similar to what the CSV export would do, only it's in a Word table. This is really great when you need a quick output for that meeting and you've got 30 minutes to get it out. This one is going to allow you to really quick output a document that you can take with you in tables that look kind of nice. So we've had a lot of requests for this one, and I hope everybody likes it. That wraps up everything I had to show you today. But before I turn this back over to Eva for questions, I'd like to emphasize 2 key points. First, we've done our best to document these capabilities so that you can have the resources at your fingertips. Again, you'll find those under Help, Help Contents, then expand the book for getting information into and out of core, and select the option that you're looking at. Second, we're here to help. There we go. You can reach our support team, and we are happy to help you out with this. Our phone number is 540-951-3999, and you can also email me at support@vitechcorp.com, and we are happy to help you do this. So far, a lot of the help I've been giving is helping people to create their own custom table definitions, and then they can save those as part of their project and reuse over and over again. Eva, I'm going to turn it over to you one more time for questions.
All right, thanks, Bethany. I have a couple questions here. Let's get to them. My first one is from Peter. He asks, can data take the round trip from DOORS to core and back to DOORS?
Oh, you bet. And our DOORS connector was designed with this in mind. It's important when you first connect the two that we take our time, do so thoughtfully. Peter, please give our support team a call. We'll connect you with experts that can help you do this and get it set up the first time, because if we get it right the first time, you're not going to have to examine or work on those things. You can just execute through that. We also have someone here who's pretty good with DOORS and can talk about what you need to do on that side to make sure that as we sync this up the first time, we do everything the right way to make it really simple for future syncs.
All right, thank you, Bethany. Our next question is from Stacy. She wants to know, can I do CSV or DOORS exports with only change information?
You sure can. Changes can be tracked in a variety of ways, okay? And we don't have something where I can say, hey, just give me what's changed since my last save. We don't have that. But what you could do is utilize filters to, I showed you in the export, it had that filter option, and you could utilize a filter to do that, and the filter is only looking for things where the modified date is after a certain time. So it's absolutely possible. I didn't demonstrate that today, but take a look at filters, and it should work for you. And if you have any questions, again, give me a call. I'm happy to walk you through.
All right. Next question is from Ben. What type of DOORS output is needed for import to core?
Well, Ben, I'm not a DOORS expert. I'm sorry. A little tongue-tied, but I can tell you that I know that there's a method where you can output it to CSV, and that's what you're going to want to do so that both tools are talking to a common format of CSV in between the two. And so once you've output from DOORS to CSV, then Core can bring that in.
Okay. Looks like that's all the questions we have for today. So thank you everyone for submitting those. So that wraps up the final Q&A. If we weren't able to answer your questions today, we will contact you directly to ensure that your question is answered. If you have any other questions or comments that you didn't send in today, please post them in the forum of our community site at community.vitechcorp.com. And as I mentioned before, a recording of today's webinar will be posted in the resources section of the VITEC website by the close of business tomorrow. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for today's presentation. At the end of our program, a survey will open on your screen in a new browser tab or in a new window. Please take a moment to provide us with feedback on today's presentation or on what topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.